Hi, this is the show that answers the questions that expats, nomads, and full-time travelers living across the globe ask themselves every day. These insights and secrets are shared when we interview experts and authors from across the globe. Hi, everybody. It is my pleasure today to introduce Renata Urban, who is a linguistics and language teacher and also an intercultural communication trainer, advisor, and specialist. Basically, she helps people become more cultured or more aware of the culture we internally have in our hearts and our minds, and she helps them move overseas and back home again. Welcome today, and thank you for coming back, Renata.
Thank you very much, Doreen. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Can you tell me how long you've been doing cross-cultural communication?
Well, to me, it's a package of different things that I do. I still do a combination of language, intercultural, and communication skills training. And if I take it as a package, I've probably been doing it for 30 something years. But obviously, over the years, there's been a different focus on these three elements. And I've been starting out as maybe more of a soft skills coach, then transitioned into more of a language teacher, and then coupled it with intercultural training, and then kind of brought it all back together. I really felt like all these elements perfectly dovetail, and I can help people by bringing these three elements together.
That's excellent. And so you've been doing this for a long time.
Yes, absolutely.
So talk to us about your impression or your unique definition of culture.
Yeah, I mean, there are many definitions, and I won't quote any because I think you've had that on the show before.
Yes, there are so many. I want to hear your unique perspective because you're a one-of-a-kind individual and you have a unique perspective like everybody else does, right?
Yeah, and of course I do quote these famous interculturalists when I talk about culture, but because it's so hard to grasp, it's something so intangible to most people. Sometimes I do ask students or clients of mine, how would you define culture? And then to them, I sometimes get answers like, oh, the opera or heritage of my country. And yes, fair enough, that is culture. This is all part of culture. So it depends on how we look at it. And as long as we consider it something very valuable that we're surrounded by, that influences us, then yes, that coincides with the famous definitions of culture by many interculturalists. But a lot of people do not understand right from the start what type of culture we mean when we do intercultural training. Because culture is, and I like to quote someone famous here again too, culture is like water, like fish in water. We all know this famous quote. And as long as we're in the water, we don't realize what water is. But take the poor fish out of the water and the fish will realize immediately. And it's the same with people outside their own culture. You just have to take them out of their culture. And that's the moment they actually realize what it is. It was all those wonderful, comforting, but also annoying things that surround you that make up daily life. And you don't even notice it's there because you've become so good at navigating it, of either loving it, using it to your advantage, or learning to live with it if you didn't like it that much. But it's not a big deal because you knew it. It was familiar, like a cozy blanket. And all of a sudden it's gone. Things just work in a different way. And that's when you realize what culture is, when somebody takes away your blanket.
Oh, that's a great way to put it. I love it. And so when I moved to Mexico, somebody took away my blanket, but I had lost my blanket somewhere around the world anyway, in a different culture. Talk to me about how you think our listeners need to think about this, because, you know, a lot of our listeners are expats and they're nomads and they're traveling around the world and they're trying to make sense of where they have arrived in possibly a short period of time.
Yeah.
Do you have some tips or strategies for them?
Well, I always tell people to use my 5-step system, which is not reinventing the wheel, but simply summarizing what's out there for us in terms of advice. Step number 1 would be to become self-aware. There's so many things you can do. Maybe you work with an organization or a coach who uses one of those tests or self-assessment systems. A lot of people don't like them. They say it's a psychometric test that doesn't really reflect who I am, but it gives you a little bit of insight into who you are, what your preferences are. Or if you don't like tests, a coach could go through different areas in life and assess your preferences in a conversation. But getting to know yourself and your preferences, what do I like? What do I dislike? What are the must-haves in my life? What are the deal breakers? Evaluating that is the first step and extremely important, because without that, you cannot move on to step number 2, which is awareness of either the new person you're dealing with or the new country you're living in or the new international situation that you're facing. So it doesn't help when you don't know yourself before you analyze the place where you're going. So a lot of people start with step 2. They buy a guide for the country where they're going with the do's and don'ts. Like what not to say in Mexico, what not to do when you go out for dinner in Mexico. They know these do's and don'ts, but they don't really know the cultural aspects of life that have very much to do what we do on a daily basis, how we interact with others, what our personal preferences are. So you really have to become self-aware before you become aware of the foreign culture or the new situation you're transitioning to. Once you've done that, you can move on to step 3, where you compare. This is what I call the gap analysis, which is extremely important to realize, actually, it's not very different from what I'm used to, or that's exactly what I like. Well, then you don't sense a lot of trouble there, do you? And it should be easy. But then you realize there are other areas of life that are very different. And that's a new way of thinking. That's a completely different worldview. And then you have to be careful and slowly get adjusted to those differences. But at least you know where the differences are. You've done your gap analysis. Hopefully by that point, step 4, you realize that there is no better or worse. There's just different. Because back home, not everything was rosy, right? There were things you didn't like back home, but you learned to live with them. Mm-hmm. And that's the same thing you have to do in the new environment. Mm-hmm. Just realize it's different. Realize what you need to get adjusted to and what's going to be a walk in the park, because that's right up your alley.
Sure.
Which finally leads me to step number 5, which is stretch your comfort zone. It's a bit of a workout on a daily basis, because you will realize there are these areas that are quite different. There are things that take you outside your comfort zone. Don't think you have to change completely who you are. Just stretch a little every day. I always say this is like going to the gym. Would you pick up the heaviest weights on day 1? No, you would try the little weights until you feel comfortable, until you know you can try the next level and the next and the next. You stretch over time. You stretch your cultural muscle until you feel comfortable with where you are. These are basically the 5 steps I can recommend.
So we build our cultural muscles over time.
Yes, we do. We're never done building. I mean, I've been doing this for quite a while. I'm an intercultural trainer, and guess what? I sometimes still have to work on this cultural muscle.
Yes.
But we are more aware. We recognize it when it happens, and we're more prepared. This is what happens.
Yes, and it happens faster, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. You pick up a situation, whereas before, when you were more unexperienced, you would totally think everything is fine or not realize what's going wrong here. Lots of pitfalls, and you didn't even notice them. As you become more culturally aware and agile, you start realizing the situations. You start talking to yourself in a way like, oh, hang on a second, that's a situation of an intercultural difference. What could I do? Let's have a look at how they see it. Why are they doing this? Let me take a step back and observe and think about what I could do. Am I ready for this? Or am I going to come back tomorrow and try again and think about it overnight? You catch yourself and you're more prepared. Doesn't mean that you're fully aligned with all the cultural differences in the new country. It simply means you recognize them and you've become a little more comfortable handling them over time. That's what it means.
So this is fascinating. Last weekend was Easter, and of course it's Felices Pascuas, and that's the happy Easter for everybody. Yeah. And in our little town, it's extremely driven by the Catholicism and the culture. So it's the combination. They have several processions that are very serious, carrying effigies and carrying crosses, and people dressed up as gladiators, and they enter into it fully. And the processions, some of them take 3 or more hours to pass.
Yeah.
And as outsiders, we stand there and we watch this. And I'm just dying to talk to a local to say, tell me more. How did this happen over time that it built up to such a crescendo? And tell me more about the meaning for you. So would you suggest some ways of, I have a mentor next door. Do you have suggest some practical ways that I can broach this subject and sort of to try and cross that gap? Because we can go and we can stand up and watch something, but not really fully understand what's happening.
Right. Absolutely. So when you talk to someone, when you show curiosity, and that's a must have when you move abroad. So kudos to everyone who does show curiosity and who does want to know more. But when you do it and when you approach someone, just be aware that they are probably not interculturally trained, that they're maybe not so used to people not from their own culture. And think about it, how they may perceive your inquisitive nature. So is it actually welcome or is it not? How could they possibly misunderstand it? Think about this before you ask. Not everybody asking curious questions is welcome. Not every single one of your questions may be appropriate. So you want to think it through. The better you know someone, the more positive the outcome will be.
Yes.
So if you say you have a mentor, you already know each other well, you have established some level of good relationship, then it's much easier that you approach the person and say, look, I participated in this procession the other day. I was overwhelmed by how beautiful it was. Make compliments about what you saw. Don't say, don't you think, you guys, this is a bit weird, is a bit over the top? Don't approach it that way, but see it as a compliment. Like I was overwhelmed by the beauty of it. I have never seen it in such elaborate and enticing ways. Can you tell me more about it? And then they may not even know what to tell you, because remember, fish in water don't know what water is. To them, it's normal. So what am I supposed to tell this foreigner? It's what we all do. It's what you do on Easter, right? Does anybody not do it? That's what they may ask themselves.
Yes,
so you be prepared for the reaction that they may not really understand your curiosity, because it's such a normal thing to them.
Absolutely. And that's a really good point, is to always try and be thinking about how their perspective.
Yes. So what is their perspective? Their perspective is, that's normal. We do it every year. You can either watch and enjoy, or you can actively participate. If you actively participate, you're probably extremely passionate about it. And how could anyone question it and not do it? What is there to ask about? What is there not to understand about this? Are you not a believer? You might be questioned for all sorts of things,
Interesting. So this could bring up a lot of deep beliefs.
Absolutely, because if you do this out of deep religious faith, then you would assume that everybody knows exactly why and what this is and why we do it and how much we need it.
Yes.
And then only a non-believer would ask these ridiculous questions. So be aware how your questions may be perceived and tread lightly, very carefully. Not every curious person is received with open arms.
Well, I think that is a wonderful warning. Beware.
But still,
beware.
I would still encourage you to ask.
Yes.
I would just encourage you to, first of all, select the person you ask carefully.
Yes.
Make sure you have already established a relationship where these kind of questions are sort of allowed and understood.
Yes.
Declare yourself what your intentions are. That's always very important. Make compliments about something beautiful you have witnessed. You come from a different culture. That's why you don't understand it. Yes, it's obvious, but I feel we need to remind people over and over again of this. Because the longer we live there, the more we are, the neighbor from next door, we know her, the more they forget that you don't know certain things. The more you become included in the community, the less you are perceived as a foreigner, the stranger the questions may seem to them.
Because familiarity does breed not necessarily contempt, but it breeds automation, sort of in our thinking.
And this is what brings me back to your first question: what is culture? Culture has a lot to do with this automation. We're on autopilot. That's basically what culture is. And as soon as we encounter somebody who's not on the same autopilot, we go like, wait a second, how come?
Yes. And why are they on that autopilot? I think that's very, very good advice in terms of the practicality of living as a functional cross-cultural person.
Yeah.
Very, very useful.
Sorry about that. It's just something else that came to my mind because for some time I've preoccupied myself with looking into cultural appreciation versus cultural appropriation. When we show this big amount of curiosity and apparently appreciation for another culture, but we want to wear it like our own, we may come across as someone who's committing a cultural crime, the cultural crime of appropriation, and we don't want to come across as that. So just a word of warning.
Cultural appropriation is something that I've been conscious about for many years, but I find that is the hardest, strangest situation to intuit and to suss it out, because I think it's so unique and so personal, right?
It's about what is appropriate and what is not, which is the quintessential cultural topic.
Yes.
Because we all think we are decent human beings who are friendly, polite, and respectful, yet we encounter pitfalls all around us and we don't even know how this could have happened.
Yes, exactly. I'd like to go back a little bit, if we can just walk this back a minute. You talked about self-assessments, and we know there's all these tests out there, and every cultural institute has their version of it, and they're used a lot in corporate world. But do you have a recommendation of a self-assessment that the independent expat or nomad can just go online and take?
It's a bit difficult. I actually want to discourage people from doing it on their own.
Okay. Tell us more.
Why is that? Because you need some sort of debriefing.
Yes.
After you've taken the test.
Yes.
And it's not just like reading your horoscope type of thing. Or it's maybe it is similar because people are disappointed sometimes when they do, You read your horoscope, you read your self-assessment, you do the Myers-Briggs personality test, whatever is out there and it's famous, and you do one of those and you may be disappointed because it's not what you expected. It's not what you think you are. And so you really need someone who's familiar with the test and with intercultural dimensions, who can talk you through the results, who can explain to you what it means, who can maybe reiterate in discussions why it shows such a high score here or there, because it's not typical for me. What could have caused it? What is the question I answered that led to that result? what does it mean? And I really think you need this element of debriefing and coaching in order to fully understand it, appreciate it, and then use it. This quick fix 10-minute online test and self-assessment without the help of anybody who's done this for years can lead to even a worse situation than you were before, because now you believe you're this other personality that you don't like and you never wanted to be like that. So I'd be very, very careful with that.
Well, that's probably extremely sound advice, but I felt like I wanted to ask that on behalf of our listeners who are listening today and are maybe considering diving into culture and learning more about intercultural affairs. I see our job here as being the translators in a way from the academics and the people who have written all the storied studies that have been done for decades on the subject, and the average bear who is just living his expat life, but wants it to be more fulfilling, more satisfying, with easier communication and a greater understanding of an awareness of everything that's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you talk about these assessments, online assessments, there is a reason why most of them are actually not available to the general public. But you, as a teacher, trainer, coach, you have to take a course. The organizations that have created it, you need to become aware on how it works, how to debrief it, how to coach people once they have the results. There's a reason why you have to take the course as a trainer and then become licensed to use it. And it's not available to the general public.
Exactly.
There are some free tests and some of them may be nice. So I don't want to discourage people from taking them. But you have to take it with a grain of salt. It's almost like reading your horoscope. Search deeply who you are and what your preferences are. It's much better to buy some literature on what are intercultural dimensions, and then self-assess based on what you read in the book. Do I tend to be more on this side of the sliding scale or more on that side of the sliding scale? I'm a big fan of Erin Mayer's book, The Culture Map, and it comes a bit of like a self-assessment test. If you do study the literature, the book itself, and then take a bit of a self-assessment test, you're better prepared, rather than logging on to some sort of website, answering 10 questions, and then getting a one-page report and not really knowing what to do with it.
Yes, and I would agree. The Culture Map is a very accessible book with very understandable ideas and concepts, and would be a great place to start. So thank you very much for that. Why are some people successful and others are not in terms of moving to a new place, recognizing that the culture is different, and then their process of assimilation into that culture? Now, they may never be 100% assimilated because many people living overseas still tend to cling to a bit of an expat bubble, but many people are also living very successfully cross-cultured. So tell us what you think are the markers for success, and what muscles should we be building?
It very much depends on who you are as a personality, and we're back to square one. Know yourself, what you like, what you don't like, what you want in life, and why you're doing this. This is the most important question. Why are you doing this? Is somebody sort of nudging you to take the 3-year assignment to get another promotion afterward, and you're just biting the bullet and you want to get through with it, and once you're done, you're back home because you never really wanted to go abroad, but you know it's a step on your career ladder? A lot of people do it for these reasons. They're not the expats who really want to live abroad. These are the ones who minimalize their exposure to the culture, and they simply want to survive for as long as it takes, and they've always known they will go back. This is one category. And then we have the absolute opposite, the digital nomads of this world who can't wait to move to another place and explore and feel so comfortable anywhere. They can build a new life, a new home with new adventures. They do it for entirely different reasons. So the
Yes.
question is, who are you and what do you want out of life? So do you want me to tell you how to survive your 3-year assignment, even though you didn't want to go? Or do you want me to tell you, how do I become one of these digital nomads and live a happy life abroad? Because these are two different categories of people.
They are. A lot of it goes back to your motivation and your drive and why are you there? I have a little bit of an insight into that in terms of, first of all, I was a professional working overseas as a diplomat. Then I was a professional working overseas in corporate. And then I was an entrepreneur as a migrant. And then I transformed into a trailing spouse with a professional, and then back to being an entrepreneur, but in another country. So those transitions are huge. And the motivation behind each of them is very different. And I think examining your purpose is the first step in understanding why you're going overseas, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. Why am I doing this? This should always be the first question. And then your course of action very much depends on what you answer. What is my purpose? What is my motivation? What are my intentions? There are some studies why some people are more successful as an expat than others. And if you want to be successful, yes, you can try to live up to those guidelines. But like I said, it's not that everybody likes the idea. So, for example, one category is your attitude, your openness to new things, your curiosity, your love of a good adventure. If that is very high level of that in people, they're usually more successful than others. So, but this is something you can't really switch on and off. You are either like that or you're not. If you do not have a sense of adventure and curiosity, there's no course in the world that can teach you how to do that. Maybe a coach can show you the advantages of being a little more curious, but you will not turn into the ultimate curious person who would do that by nature. What you can do is build your skill set, build your knowledge, like read up upon everything you need to know about this new culture. Read your books, study videos, listen to podcasts like yours, make yourself familiar, kind of get closer to it, closer and closer. At first a little bit, and then when you warm up a little bit. The fire may be too hot at first, but as you get closer and closer and you warm up to it, you can stay closer to it. So you can do this over time, and that will make your period of expatriation more, well, let's say, bearable if it wasn't for your first choice.
Yes, fun. Possibly even fun.
Or more fun and successful if it is something you really wanted. And then the final point is adaptability. If you have a high level of adaptability, and that is the willingness to change things, your emotional and intercultural agility, your love for adventure, like the ambiguity and uncertainty, if you don't have a problem with that, if you really ask very good questions, the why beyond the what, this level of adaptability and flexibility really helps people having a better time as an expat.
Yes, it really does. I have seen that. Now, you are suggesting that we become self-aware, we take the guides, follow the guides, get a coach like yourself. We close the gap between what we're understanding and what it is we need to learn or would prefer to be in a different place. Then we understand that there's nothing better or worse, that we just recognize and accept the differences. And finally, you recommend that we stretch our comfort zone by building those cultural muscles, like having the willingness to change, practicing cultural appreciation, knowing where the borderlines of cultural appropriation are, right?
Yeah, and it's actually not really possible to close the gap, to
No,
fully close.
never.
That's why we need to stretch. We need
Yes,
to just to recognize how wide it is and
yes,
where it is bigger than in other
yes.
places. But we will never be able to close it 100%.
I
And
agree. I
that's
agree. And
also
that's
something people
uncomfortable.
need to wrap their mind around, because I know a lot of these perfectionists in this world who say, okay, in a year from now, you will not be able to recognize me as a foreigner. I will be completely settled in. I will have acquired a local accent. And okay, that's a bit unrealistic, but I appreciate the passionate
Yes, the
mentality.
willingness, the
Yeah,
willingness,
willingness.
right?
Yes.
So, when you were saying that, I was thinking that there are some people who are just more, I think it is about willingness. It's how uncomfortable are we willing to be, right?
Yes.
I always think about it as every move is going to be really uncomfortable and it's going to be hard in ways I don't understand yet. So I can't do anything about that until I get there.
And this is why these people are more successful, because they like being uncomfortable. They like
Oh,
being out of their comfort zone. They like a good adventure. They like jumping off that bridge with a bungee on their feet. These type of people will have less of an issue with getting adjusted and with the unpredictability of things, the
yes, yes.
ambiguity, the uncertainty. They will embrace it much more easily.
So tell me about learning the language. Um, I'm currently still learning Spanish. I expect to be learning Spanish till the day I die.
Okay, yeah, that's a
And
good
so
goal.
I've just decided that's the way it will have to be. Um, but I get the sense that when I learn a few phrases that are not necessarily translatable,
Mhm.
because not everything is word for word, that just kind of helps give a feeling for the culture. So, what have you observed, and what do you know about the integration of taking on a language and how far that takes you in your cultural adaptation?
The two are ultimately entwined. They cannot be separated. That is what I've actually realized in the course of my career. I can't just be a language teacher or an intercultural trainer. There's both elements that always want to work together. You can't really separate them into two rooms. They always want to come back together. Language and culture is like two twins, inseparable. So as soon as you learn a foreign language, you will need to know certain things about the culture. And when you do intercultural training, you will have elements of language that find their way into the intercultural training, even though it's not language training. So they're cross-pollinating in a way, and you can't have one without the other. So if you are an expat moving to a country where a language is spoken that you know for sure you will never learn, because it's so complicated, you're only staying for
Yes,
2 years, where's the point?
yes,
I understand that. And
yes,
you shouldn't have unrealistic goals, because you have a full-time job to do. Learning the language would also be a full-time job, so you
yes.
can't. But there are certain things you can learn that will bring you closer to the culture. It starts with a very basic yes, no, thank you, please, or certain phrases that are very common. What is a standard phrase that you say after dinner to thank your host? What is a
Mm.
standard phrase to say, excuse me, I do not speak your beautiful language. Do you understand English? Find somebody who can translate just a few sentences for you, a few words and phrases that will bring you closer to the culture, and you're showing an interest and some sort of respect for your host country. Everybody will understand that you will not learn the language within 2 years, but you're
Yes.
showing an interest, showing respect, and you're giving it a try.
And those attitudes are what carries us forward in life anyway, the
Yes.
positivity and the joy, right?
And I also have to say, a little word at least about native speakers of English with that respect, because they're
Yes.
kind of born with the idea that the whole world understands them and that they can travel the world without having to learn any foreign languages, because you will find someone everywhere who speaks at least a little bit of English. And this doesn't come out of nowhere, because it's kind of true. You just have to look a little further, dig a little deeper. Every little village somewhere, somebody will run around and grab one person, pull them over, say, talk to her. She doesn't speak
Yes.
our language. And at least they're able to speak a little bit of English.
Yes.
And you should, if that happens to you, you should be so extremely thankful that they're doing this, instead of saying, oh, well, your English is not exactly great and you just made a mistake. And, the language teacher attitude. I always tell native speakers, please always appreciate the willingness of others to communicate with you in their second, third, or fourth language, which is English. Appreciate it a lot more than grammatical accuracy, pronunciation, correct use of vocabulary. They may actually use creative vocabulary because they don't know the word, but they're trying to explain it to you. It may seem funny to you in that moment, but you should appreciate that they're willing to communicate, because that's all you want in intercultural communication, the willing to communicate.
I call that giving grace.
Yes, absolutely.
I was very humbled in Saudi Arabia when about 2:00 in the afternoon on many days, my doorbell would ring and there would be a Pakistani or an Indian or a Sri Lankan outside my door asking to fill a plastic bottle of sweet water because the water outside was brackish and they didn't, and it would have evaporated or be gone by 2:00. And they would come to the door and they would speak their own language, plus Urdu, perhaps, or another dialect, and Arabic and English. And I was humbled. I was just blown away by the fortune and the grace that I needed to practice to give them as much generosity and the benefit of any doubt, and as much as like water or anything else they needed. Even shade, even sleeping in a garage was a gift. Right. So really becoming an expat can be a very humbling experience.
Absolutely.
This has been great, Renata. Before we close, I got a couple of questions for you.
Yeah.
Just fun questions. If you were going to be banished to a desert island, what dish would you want to take with you? What is your favorite food?
Oh, wow. That's almost impossible to answer.
One food from where you live. One.
I like so many different things, and I like to recreate all those dishes I've come to like over the years and decades, that I can't really say this is my one and only favorite food. I would just say on this desert island, it seems unrealistic, but it's an unrealistic question. Anyway, I would look for all the food stores and resources possible to recreate all the dishes I like, because that's a good reflection of what I do wherever I live. I do like so many different things, and I would probably try to recreate as much of what I know and of what I've come to appreciate.
And what's familiar. Good answer. And if you were to have one superpower that you would be able to grant to any expat or digital or nomad of any sort living overseas, what would that superpower be?
A superpower? Oh, well, I don't know. Maybe we could say to have a sixth sense, maybe.
Perfect.
People feel and want and need, so that they do not have to rely on their language training and their intercultural course, so they could just feel it and know it, kind of breathe it in, suck it in like a sponge, and just be it. That superpower of sensing and feeling appropriacy and what is necessary.
I think that's a beautiful one to bestow on everyone who is within earshot of your voice today. Thank you so much for your background. Now, how can people find you?
Well, there's 3 areas of training I offer: language courses, intercultural training, and communication skills training. So I always say I help people communicate effectively in their own language, in a foreign language, and across cultures. And if
Nice.
that's anything you need or that interests you, you can find me on my website, which is Renata Urban Training, and also on LinkedIn or on several platforms online where I advertise my services. And just reach out to me. I do a couple of free gatherings every week, every month. I have a couple of freebie courses for language training, for intercultural meetups, and so on. I will also be happy to do just a Zoom chat with you. I want people to get to know me. Many videos that I've recorded over time they could watch to get to know me, see what my approach is, how I work, and then they could decide whether I'm the right coach for them or not, because that's something you need to find out before you start working with someone, because we're all different. Remember, we're all different cultural beings, and you need to find someone you trust and you really want to work with.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Well, listeners, you know where to find Renata, and we encourage you to reach out to her after this episode. Thank you so much for this conversation. This was great and very different from our other conversations.
Wonderful. I very much enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And listeners, please, would you listen, like, and rate and review the podcast? We would be so grateful. Thank you very much.